Welcome to Spirit Club, a podcast and community where we talk about what's really running the show, your inner world. I'm Angel, your host, your guide, and your spiritual bestie. Around here, we're all about doing the inner work because your outer reality is only ever a reflection of what's going on within. We practice radical ownership, freedom in faith, surrendering our path to God, and trusting our intuition like our lives depend on it. Because honestly, they do. So take a breath, open your heart, and let's dive in. Hey, Spirit Club, welcome back, and welcome back to the Reclamation Series. This, if you don't know already, is a little mini series I'm doing on Spirit Club right now, talking about the parts of my spirituality that I have gone back and reclaimed from religion. These are parts of my spirituality that one would conventionally consider religious, but that I've gone back and made my own and I've connected to authentically. So we've talked about how I've reclaimed God, reclaimed prayer. Last week, I had my dad on as a guest, and we talked about faith, what faith looks like to him. And today I'm going to talk about reclaiming church. So, aren't old churches so beautiful? Like, isn't it undeniable? They're so beautiful. And now that I'm in Europe, I get to see them a lot more. There's just something about the smell, the smell of the incense and the candles that have been burning, the smell of the wood, the feel of the wood and how it's softened after years and years of people touching it, sitting on it, praying in it. Then there's the stained glass. Then there's all the artwork. There's just so much beauty in a church. I feel like we can all see that. And I've always found old churches beautiful, which is interesting because where I grew up, it's like a newer part of Canada. We don't have as much old churches around. But when I moved to Montreal, I lived in Montreal for about 7 years, from 2008 to 2015. And at that time in my life, I had no relationship to God. This is sort of in my early 20s when I had turned away from God, turned away from religion, didn't feel good about any of that. And yet, I was working downtown, I was working at an office, and whenever I was feeling a sort of way on my lunch break, I would walk to the nearby old, beautiful cathedral, and I would go and sit in a pew by myself silently and I don't know what, work through whatever was on my heart, whatever was on my mind. I certainly wasn't praying, but in a way, although I wasn't intentionally praying, I was. Because there I was seeking the support and the solace of that church. And there was something about it that I could feel, I felt a little bit like I was home. Moving to a new city at a young age, it took a long time for Montreal to feel like home to me. And in those early days, the place that I felt most at home was sitting in that church, interesting enough. And it's especially interesting because for me, growing up, going to church, I didn't like going to church. I didn't like it at all. I didn't want to go. I fought going. I think mostly because socially, I am an introvert and have that language at the time, but I was socially uncomfortable. And so going to church meant social interactions. It meant Sunday school, which I absolutely hated because I did not fit in. I did not have friends. I just felt like awkward and uncool and unpopular. I would have much rather stayed for the boring sermon than go down to Sunday school. So most of my experience growing up going to church, I did not like that place. So it's interesting that I have always found myself at home and drawn to old churches. And maybe that's because there's a part of my soul that remembers being in these old churches. Maybe it's the energy of them. Maybe it's how sacred they are, whatever it is. Anyway, so with all this being said, given that I didn't enjoy church growing up, why did I go and reclaim church as an adult who was starting to connect to God? So, when I started to open my heart to God, this was at a time when I was studying A Course in Miracles, and I didn't really have many people in my life that I could talk to about what I was starting to connect to, what I was starting to feel and understand. Because if I were to bring it up to the people in my life, they were uncomfortable with the concept of God. And so that's why I started looking for a church. I thought, maybe this will be the place. Although it wasn't for me growing up, maybe now as an adult with a new lens to see my faith through, maybe there is a new way for me to experience church. But I didn't know. So I was like, all right, let's start church shopping. And I live in Calgary, a big city. There's lots of church shopping that can be done. So I sort of had my criteria. I was like, okay, I want an old building. I want an old, beautiful building. And although that might sound superficial, it really means something to me. The space, the fact that people have prayed and worshiped and connected to God there over a long period of time, hundreds, well, not in Calgary, won't be hundreds of years, but decades, means something to me. So I wanted that. And then mostly there were things that I didn't want, that I was on the lookout for. I wasn't expecting perfection from a church, but there are certain things that I just wouldn't stand for. So I didn't want to hear any exclusivity or like othering language. I didn't want it to feel culty. And I know you guys know, because I know that's a big reason why you probably are uncomfortable with church and or religion, is it, there can be a culty feel, and we don't like that. A lot of us don't like that, at least. So I didn't want it to feel that way. I didn't want me to walk into a church and it to feel like, oh, those of us in here are better than those on the outside. I didn't want any of that. So I was really watching for that. And then the last thing I wanted was to make sure that there was some singing, because although I didn't like church growing up, the one thing that I did like was singing in church. So, yeah. And then obviously I wanted to feel safe, welcomed, and comfortable. I think that's a pretty obvious criteria. So the first church I went and checked out, it was in Inglewood. So for those of you who are not from Calgary, Inglewood is this old part of the city. So if you're going to find an old looking church, that is likely where you're going to find it. And I did, and it was a super beautiful church. However, that service that I attended had like a dozen people in it. It was very, very small. Too small for me, too intimate. So I moved on. The next church I tried, I went with one of my friends that I had in my Course in Miracles study group. So we went together, thankfully, because it was quite overwhelming. It was an apostolic church, in case you're interested. But anyways, it was huge. And the building, it wasn't an old, beautiful church. It was more like it had like auditorium or warehouse vibes to it. And it had a lot of people in it, like hundreds. And they'd all be filing in, like, I don't know, maybe the service started at like 10 and people would be filing in for like the next hour, which was kind of cool, that sort of like casual feel to it. But it was huge. There were tons and tons of people. And there was like a full on band, like, drums, guitar, the works, the whole audio visual. Yeah, not quite my vibe. And then the service was like 3.5 hours long. And at one point, everyone was shouting in tongues. So, yeah, that one wasn't for me, not for me. So finally, third time, luckily for me, was a charm, and I stumbled upon Hillhurst United. I lived in Hillhurst at the time, and I was just walking along and I saw this beautiful church. I was like, all right, walking distance from my house, okay. And I can remember the first service I attended. I remember the soft feeling of the pews and the wood and how warm and welcoming that felt. And there was quiet piano playing while everyone casually filed in. It wasn't a super packed service, but it wasn't totally empty either. And I remember the minister just having that really like kind, generous, open, warm energy. And then they started the service by talking about their values. And one of their values, I can't remember the word they used for it, but it basically meant all are welcome. It was like inclusivity is one of the things we stand on. And they even said something along the lines of something like, even if you're not into the Bible and Jesus and you feel spiritual and you want a place to go, you are welcome here. And I was like, wow, okay, yes, this feels good. This feels inclusive and open. And then we started to sing, and I started to cry, and I knew I had found my church. So after attending Hillhurst United for a few years, I thought I would share why. Why did I reclaim church? What about church is important to me? So first of all, the singing. You guys, I'm not a singer. I am not good. But it isn't really about that. It isn't about that at all, actually. I mean, obviously, it's super nice to hear a good singer sing in church. Oh my gosh, the best. But if you listen to the words in gospel music, it is so it is so high vibes. And then you sing it with a group and you're joyful and you're bringing your vibration up. Like, what a beautiful practice. What a beautiful prayer. It is, yeah, I feel like it's a life hack that we overlook all too much. And I often, often cry while singing in church or while listening to gospel. The second reason I reclaim church is that I love witnessing others in their faith, open and honest in their faith. There's something about it that just gets me. And I often cry. And, I think it's because last week when my dad and I were on the podcast together, we talked about how it takes a lot of courage to be open about your faith and about your love for God, your relationship to God. But in church, in a church atmosphere, everyone kind of knows that they're safe to do that. And so they openly have their faith displayed. And I think it's really beautiful. I love watching people in their own little rituals. Maybe they're holding a rosary. Maybe they have a little journal and they're taking notes while they listen to the sermon. Watching an old man with his eyes closed whisper prayer. Watching people sing and tear up. It's so beautiful. Yeah. And that's something that I really go to church for. And then, of course, there's the building, which I've already talked about. I really think that I must have had a past life that involved churches because I feel very at home in them, and I love the sacredness of them, the energy of them, the history of them. I reclaim church for connection. That one's kind of duh, but honestly, I actually kind of love and hate the social connection at church because I am an introvert. And so it's uncomfortable for me, but that doesn't mean that it's not good for me and that I don't appreciate it. And in my church at Hillhurst United, there's always a point in the service where we walk around and we spread the peace and we have like a little coffee break. And everyone's walking around saying, peace be with you, or peace is possible, and shaking hands. And I think that is such a beautiful moment. And it's nice for my introvert self because I don't really have to go beyond that. I can just wish someone peace. I can just bless them, shake their hand, connect with them, and I can move on. And there's also another point in the service where the minister gives us a question of the day, and then he encourages you to turn to someone you don't know in your pew and chat about this question for 1 minute. 1 minute. My introvert self can do that. And I specifically recall this one time where I was getting ready to quit my job in order to make this move to Greece. And I was scared. I was very nervous. Um, it was requiring a lot of courage, and I was trying to muster that courage. And I turned to the woman beside me who I'd never met before, never seen before, to chat about the question of the day. And I can't remember what it was, but it must have been something about courage because I was sharing how I was trying to build this courage in myself to quit my job. And then she tells me that she is also quitting her job. And I was like, what are the chances? What are the chances? And you know what the chances are? Obviously, God brought us together. And so we had this beautiful synchronistic moment. And then at the end of the service, before leaving, she asked if she could give me a hug. And she gave me a hug. And then she told me she's proud of me. Sorry, it's making me tear up a little bit. She told me she was proud of me. This woman that I had never met before gave me a hug and told me she was proud. And I can't tell you how much strength that gave me to go and do what I knew I needed to do. So, connection. Church brings connection. And then the final reason that I reclaimed church was for the weekly commitment. I mean, yes, I have daily commitments, daily connections, like sort of points in my day where I connect to God through prayer, through meditation, things like this. But it doesn't hurt to have another weekly commitment. And it's also nice because it's a weekly commitment that isn't like a self-study. You know, I got a lot of discipline. You guys know me. I got a lot of discipline, so I can do it. I do the self-study. I do the things that are my personal commitments, but there is really something to having that community to go to every Sunday. So those are the reasons I went back and reclaimed church, and your reasons, if this is something that you're looking to do, may be very different. And I just want to add that, yes, while I found a church that was great for me, it doesn't mean that I resonated and agreed with everything that was said or done in that church. Okay? But as I've spoke of before, I have discernment. I have intuition and discernment to lean on. So when something comes up that rubs me wrong, doesn't feel quite right, doesn't feel like the God that I know, then I just leave it. I just leave it. It's okay. It doesn't mean I need to throw the whole church out. As a foundation, they hold similar values to me. We have that. I feel good and comfortable there. And yes, the odd thing's going to happen, and I just leave it. Take some things, leave others behind. And you know, I don't expect perfection, and I don't expect perfection anywhere in life and shouldn't. This, in a church, this is the divine working through and with humans that have egos, okay? And so sometimes that ego is going to be there and be steering the ship, and that just happens. And I'm aware of that, and I can handle it. And so you may be wondering, what's church life like now for me that I live in Greece? Well, I miss my church. I know you're like, aren't there a million churches in Greece? And yes, there are. Honestly, I wish I could show you right now. I'm on the top floor of the villa that we live in, and in like a 10-minute walking distance, there are probably 5 churches that I can see. There are so many on this little island. So these little churches, they're little Orthodox churches. And they are kind of like, how do I describe them? They're like a little neighborhood church. And so there aren't regular services at these churches, only on like special occasions like baptisms or weddings, or when it is the name day of the saint that the church was named after, then they'll have like a celebration at one of these little churches. But otherwise, they seem to be just a neighborhood church. I think a few people might have a key or know where it is, and they go in, they care for it, and they spend some time in prayer in their faith with God. And when I first moved here, every Sunday I would walk to a different one of these little churches, and most of them I couldn't go in because they're locked and I don't know where the key is. But whether inside or outside, I just sat and had my own little private Sunday service, which is really special because, like I said, it's still the building. Still the building holds so much. And I have attended 2 actual church services here in Greece. One Orthodox Christian service, and this was entirely in Greek, and I, I, I can't say much about it. I need to attend another one. It was priests kind of singing and humming hymns, and everyone sort of in silent prayer meditation. I do love watching the Orthodox Christians when they enter a church. They sort of have like a pattern they follow. They seem to light a candle, and then they kiss the icons. Yeah, I'll have to ask some of the Orthodox Christians I know here a little bit more about it. But anyway, I feel honored to be able to have attended one of those services, but I didn't understand anything or connect to much. And then I've also attended a Catholic service here. In the island is about 90% Orthodox Christian, 10% Catholic. And the Catholic service, it was in, I think it was Greek. It may have been part Latin. Not sure. Should pay attention for that. Anyhow, so again, didn't understand much, but at least it was a little bit more familiar. There's just like a rhythm to it that I understand and I connect to as someone who's grown up in um, Christian faith, even just Protestant. So anyway, but regardless, I've attended 2 services. Are these a church that I'm going to attend? I don't think so. Maybe one day when I'm a full Greek-speaking person, but for now, I mostly just feel like an intruder in these places. And yeah, but hey, for now, my church is both virtual, because Hillhurst United has a virtual service, and within, and that is okay. So I'll just end this with, for anyone looking to reclaim church, know that there is a church for you. Absolutely. You know, you don't need to find a Christian church. If you don't feel that that is the direction for you, there are, I think they call them spiritualism churches. There are non-denominational. There are just open spiritual places where people gather. There are virtual, there's everything. There is a church for you. You may have to do a little shopping, but you know, just like get a friend to join you and you will make some memories out of it. And just use your intuition, use your connection to God, use your heart to find what is right for you. So that's it, friends, sending you courage as you reclaim the parts of your spirituality that you may have thrown out alongside religion. Until next time.